We're back with Team Rising. We got Will and Inez here today. How's it going, guys? Great.
Well.
Okay, so another thing that is happening that a lot of people are talking about is Mayor Pete went to a historically black neighborhood for a rally, and notably the audience in this historically black neighborhood was almost all white. This is an issue, Will.
It is
not a great look.
It is an issue. I've been at one of these almost all white rallies. He held a really good meeting in Prince George's County, which is another mostly African American part of the state of Maryland, which I represent.
Yep.
And I stood out in the room, I'll say that. I think it is something that they're aware of, they're trying to address. It was actually the day before Mayor Pete released his Frederick Douglass plan, named after the great Marylander and abolitionist, which is focusing on African American life outcomes and improving opportunity and investing in HBCUs. A lot of good things.
The president says is doing more and more great work, and really people are getting to know him. So
yeah, no, and I think he's trying. The problem is, when you are a mayor of a city and you've had some issues like he's had with the police-involved shooting they didn't handle great, and it's a tough issue to deal with.
Yeah.
And then you have the message in that, I think that meeting in Brownsville saying, hey, go out and talk to your friends, bring your friends. That can't be the claim. It's like, you've got to do it. You know, I think from what I read of that reporting of that, it was that he was like, hey, go get your black friends and bring them, black and brown friends, and bring them. That's not really the message. You need to go to places where people are. And he tried to do that by going into a community, but then if you ask residents, a lot of people didn't know what was going on. So did you flyer? Did you get real grassroots? Did you knock doors? Did you go to the local establishments? Those are the types of things I think they're trying to do, but it's really hard when you're starting from zero like he is.
Yeah. Inez, what do you think is the disconnect here?
Well, I mean, you noted some of the policies that he's ruled out, but there is an interesting divide opening up on one of the issues that he does touch on, right? So he says we're going to spend more Title I money in education. That's money that goes to school districts that have a high proportion of low-income students. There's a huge divide opening up, and you'll notice that Mayor Pete and most of the Democrats don't talk much about charter schools and school choice. There's a huge divide in the Democratic electorate over charter schools and school choice, where Hispanic voters, African-American voters, pretty strong majorities approve, for example, of charter schools, 58 and 60%. And then you see white Democratic voters down there in the 20s. So the approval numbers actually completely flip on charter schools between Hispanic and African American Democratic voters and white Democratic voters. And it seems like Mayor Pete is playing into that divide, right? He's not comfortable talking about charter schools. He's not comfortable talking about school choice. And he's talking once again about adding money to Title I, which is sort of a wonky thing that doesn't really connect with voters.
I feel like you might have some perspective on this.
Yeah, no, I do. I think it's less of, I agree with you, there has always been, and I worked at the Department of Education, a debate around the effectiveness of charters and opportunity and school choice, but I don't think it's a policy issue with Mayor Pete in the sense that I just think the outreach strategy and the connectivity is not there. In the experience, you know, one of the things we talk some about the age in this primary, you know, his life experience has not been that he's had to interact with these communities of color in a necessarily authentic and holistic way. And so I think it's more of for me, I think it's more of a connectivity. What are the strategies you're using to understand and get into? It's less of a policy book on a page. It's more of how are you actually relating to communities. And I think that's it's something more intangible than an actual proposal.
But would you think that African Americans are actually up for grabs right now? Because, I mean, you look at all the polling and pretty much they have settled on Joe Biden as their candidate. So is it that...
Especially older African Americans.
Exactly. And so is it that Mayor Pete's not connecting and his strategy's not there? Or they're just not up for grabs right now because they've made their choice?
Well, if you look... And I was there in South Carolina when African Americans weren't supporting Barack Obama until he won the South Carolina primary, if we remember.
The Iowa primary,
the Iowa primary, sorry, and then dominated in South Carolina.
Right.
But prior to Iowa, African Americans were with Hillary Clinton. And so I think we've seen that electorate move. I think it depends on how well you do, what you're saying when you're speaking, and people want to get behind a winner. That's a human nature thing. And so I think he's going to need to do well in a couple of these early primary states, and then people will take another look. I don't think, while I think the support for Joe Biden is strong in the African American community, and that's reflected, I don't think that impossible that it could move to other candidates.
You don't think it's immovable?
No.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Well, Inez, I want to switch topics slightly. So we saw CBO this week release like a really insane report, right? That it was kind of assessing what I would call the damage of the Trump-Pelosi budget deal, where it's going to rack up $12.2 trillion in deficits through 2029. What is your reaction to the report? How should we be digesting this information? And why have Republicans stopped talking about this issue?
So you do see some Republicans still talking about this issue, but they're mostly the folks who were talking about it in 2010, when everyone in the Republican Party was ignoring the issue. It's one of those issues that both parties like to not ignore when they're out of power, and love to, ignore when they actually have the ability to affect these deals. But fundamentally, our deficits, our long-term structural deficits, are not driven by levels of discretionary spending. We cannot tackle this issue, this debt issue, this mounting debt issue, without tackling entitlements. So Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security make up all the revenues we're taking in right now in taxes. So folks like to talk about the tax cuts as though that dropped revenue. That's debatable, but that's a blip in terms of the larger budget. Discretionary spending, all of the spending on welfare, on military, all of the things that we like to argue about and I think are worth arguing about on a regular basis between the parties, that don't actually move the needle long term without restructuring some of these programs that are right now taking 100% of our revenues, just those 3 programs. So without that, it's not really going anywhere.
Well, this is, I think, illustrates what goes on in this debate. When Republicans are in power, right, then they spend what they want, particularly on the military and on building tax cuts for the wealthy, right? And this is, all free lunch. And then when Democrats are in power, suddenly it's the sky's falling. We got to cut programs in the social safety net to make sure we can make up the deficit. Whenever we increase military spending, there's never a how are you going to pay for it. Whenever we cut taxes for the rich, there's never a how are you going to pay for it. The moment you want to give something to a working class citizen to help make their life a little bit better, suddenly the deficit is the biggest issue.
No, we've seen this story before, and let's not forget we still have these draconian sequester cuts in effect that we staved off because of the budget deal, but. Look, you can't look at, yes, I would agree, we need to reform healthcare. That's why we took steps in the Obama administration to take a step forward with the Affordable Care Act. It's still too expensive. That's why you see Medicare for All proposals and a revamping of that system. The subsidies we're giving to oil companies, that was something that Senator Sanders talked about. We do a lot of tax breaks to a lot of people. The tax cut that wasn't paid for. I think military spending, we never talk about it, to your point. We always see the numbers. We spend more than the next 15 countries combined in military spending. So I think the deficit is continuing to be a problem, but if we don't reform these systems in a way that will benefit working class people who are struggling with health care, who need help with college tuition, for example, we're going to continue to see it rise. And the problem is, even with this budget deal, I know why both sides did it, just to get it passed and not have another debate on a shutdown. We just kick the can down the road even further on having a real debate about these issues. And so that's why this presidential election is so important. We need someone to come in and really tackle the structural long-term issues.
We got some issues. Lady and gent, thank you both. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Tomorrow in Rising, presidential candidate John Delaney is back. He tells us about his latest campaign stops and thoughts as the third debate approaches.
And one of our favorites, Dr. Joe Pash is going to tell us if that fear we've all been living inside the Matrix is unfounded or is in fact true. Are you living in a simulation right now? We're going to find out tomorrow. You don't want to miss that. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.